My name is Maren Holloway. I am 32 years old, and for most of my life, I believed I was the afterthought of my own family. I grew up in a quiet suburb in Illinois, where the houses wore chipped paint like battle scars and the air in summer carried the smell of cut grass and gasoline. My parents were not cruel in ways you could measure with bruises. Their cruelty was sharper, quieter, like a needle slipped under the skin without warning. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to discover how I went from being the failure to the one holding all the power. The day everything changed, I sat at our walnut dining table, the one polished so much that it smelled of lemon oil instead of wood. My father cleared his throat with the authority of a man announcing a verdict. My mother's perfume, sharp and cloying like wilted roses, drifted across the table. They told me they had given my $100,000 college fund to my older brother, Alden, so he could launch his new startup. "You'll never do anything with it anyway," my mother said, her voice flat as a slammed door. "Alden is our chance at a legacy." I stared at her, my hands cold against the polished surface. I had dreamed of graduate school, of building a life in urban design, maybe even leaving this tired suburb behind. But their words felt like a surgical erasure of my future. I turned to Alden, who sat smug with his tie crooked and his smile stretching too wide. He didn't even try to hide his glee. When I protested, my father's reply cut me open. "You're just jealous, Maren. You've always been jealous of him." The laughter that followed was worse than the decision. My mother laughed first, high and brittle, and Alden joined in, his voice thick with victory. My father smirked, and in that moment, I knew I no longer belonged in that house. I rose, my chair scraping the floor with a scream. I packed nothing. I walked out of that house with the weight of betrayal pressing on my shoulders like a coffin lid. But what they didn't know is that silence can be a weapon. And mine would become a blade they never saw coming. When I returned 1 year later, it wasn't as the discarded daughter. It was as the woman who now owned my brother's $5 million company. And I was ready to fire him. The night I left my parents' home, I walked through the neighborhood streets with nothing but the hum of cicadas and the faint glow of porch lights to guide me. The air smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and lilacs, though neither scent brought me comfort. My childhood house shrank behind me, its windows glowing like watchful eyes, and I wondered how long it had been since I truly belonged there. Flashbacks came in waves as I walked. I remembered sitting on the back porch at 12, sketching endless maps of dream cities. I wanted to design neighborhoods where no child felt small, where every house had space for sunlight and laughter. Alden had laughed at me then too, snapping one of my pencils in half as if breaking my dreams was his favorite sport. My parents always excused it. "He's just teasing," they'd say. But teasing hardens into something sharper when no one stops it. Years later, when Alden dropped out of college after one semester, my parents padded the truth with silk. "He's entrepreneurial," my father bragged. "He thinks outside the box." When I quietly earned a scholarship and later graduated, they clapped politely, but I could feel the hollowness in their applause. It was like they were cheering for a neighbor's child, not their own. So when they handed my college fund, money I had earned through grades, summer jobs, and constant self-denial, straight into Alden's hands, it wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation. Confirmation that in their eyes, I had never been enough. Still, walking away that night, I wasn't empty. I carried something heavy but invisible, resolve. Like a blade sheathed inside my chest, waiting for the moment it could cut. I found refuge in an old friend, Dahlia Merrick, who lived 2 towns over in a crumbling farmhouse. Dahlia smelled of coffee and wood smoke, her kitchen cluttered with chipped mugs and drying herbs. She didn't ask for explanations when I showed up at her door. She only pressed a mug into my hands and said, "Stay as long as you need." In the mornings, I worked odd jobs, delivering groceries, cleaning offices, even tending horses at a nearby ranch. The work was rough, but my body needed the ache. It reminded me I was still alive. At night, I sat at Dahlia's long oak table with my laptop, searching for opportunities. That was when I stumbled across the news of Alden's company. He had named it Arden Technologies, a cruel twist of fate, just one letter off from his own name, like a mirror image meant to immortalize him. My parents were in the photos at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, beaming as though their son had single-handedly reshaped the world. But what caught my attention wasn't the glory. It was the numbers buried in a small article. Ardent Technologies was bleeding money. Investors were whispering. Suppliers weren't paid on time. And for the first time in my life, I saw Alden not as untouchable but as vulnerable. The blade inside me glimmered. I whispered into the farmhouse kitchen that night, "This is how I begin." Little did I know, that whisper would echo all the way into a boardroom where I'd one day stand above him. I learned quickly that revenge doesn't begin with fire. It begins with patience. Like planting seeds in the dark, you have to bury them deep, water them with silence, and wait for the right season to bloom. Living at Dahlia Merrick's farmhouse gave me something I had never known before: quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of wood expanding, the way the night animals shuffle outside your window. Quiet that becomes a mirror. In that mirror, I saw all the fractures of my life, years of being overlooked, dismissed, erased. I didn't want to live inside those fractures. I wanted to rebuild. So while Alden's company stumbled under the weight of his arrogance, I began piecing together my own path. I enrolled in night courses at a small community college 2 towns over. Urban planning was still my passion, but I knew if I wanted to face him in his world, I had to speak his language: business, finance, systems. Numbers became my armor. Strategy became my weapon. I worked at the ranch by day, the smell of hay clinging to my clothes, the sting of blisters splitting across my palms. At night, I sat in classrooms that smelled of dry erase markers and burnt coffee, where tired adults scribbled notes like survivors scrambling for lifeboats. I was one of them, and I was proud of it. During this time, Dahlia became both anchor and witness. She was a widow, her husband gone from a heart attack years before, and she carried grief like a folded handkerchief tucked into her pocket, always there, but never shown unless pressed. She told me once, over mugs of chamomile tea, "People think revenge is loud, Maren. But the best kind? It's quiet. It doesn't chase. It waits. And when it arrives, it's undeniable." Her words sank into me like scripture. Meanwhile, Alden flaunted his so-called success on social media. Pictures of him at wine tastings, rooftop parties, ribbon cuttings with men in tailored suits who smelled of wealth and ego. My parents were always at his side, their smiles brittle and rehearsed. In one photo, I spotted my mother wearing the pearl necklace I had once begged to wear to prom. She never let me, saying I wasn't mature enough. But for Alden, every door was opened, every rule bent. It didn't sting anymore. Not the way it used to. It only fueled the slow burn inside me. The turning point came when one of my professors, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Isolde Crane, handed me a stack of old case studies. She smelled faintly of peppermint and carried herself with the authority of someone who had lost everything once and learned to build again. "You've got a mind for patterns," she said. "People see chaos. You see threads. That's rare, Maren. Don't waste it." That night, I studied Alden's company filings like they were puzzles. His startup wasn't innovative, it was hollow. He chased investors like a gambler chases dice, and every promise he made was written on sand. And then, like a crack in a porcelain vase, I saw it: the debts. The loans he couldn't cover. The investors growing restless. Ardent Technologies was sinking, and he didn't even realize how deep the water was. I closed my laptop, the farmhouse quiet wrapping around me like a cloak. I could almost smell the victory that lay somewhere ahead, sharp, metallic, like the tang of blood. But I knew better than to rush. The seed had only just sprouted. The harvest would come later. And when it came, I wanted Alden to see my face. By the winter of that year, I no longer walked through life like a ghost. The farm chores had carved my arms strong, the night classes had sharpened my mind, and the bitterness inside me had cooled into something steadier, like steel forged in fire. I began to see the world differently. Grocery stores weren't just aisles of food, they were case studies in supply chains. Coffee shops weren't just places of chatter, they were models of revenue streams. Even the dusty ranch barn smelled of more than hay. It smelled of hidden economies, of people exchanging sweat for survival. And so, I began to hunt. I don't mean stalking Alden in the physical sense. I hunted information. Every whisper about his company, every trade article, every post from one of his investors. I dug through public records, watched patterns in how his payments were delayed, noticed which suppliers had stopped working with him. It felt almost surgical, peeling back layers of his empire. Each document was like holding an X-ray to a body riddled with cracks. And the cracks were widening. One evening, I sat in the farmhouse kitchen with Dahlia, the smell of cornbread drifting between us. The table lamp cast a warm circle of light as I showed her spreadsheets and notes. "He's not running a company," I whispered. "He's running a mirage. And sooner or later, someone is going to pull the curtain back." Dahlia gave a quiet laugh, the kind that sounded like a worn violin string. "Let it be you, Maren. But don't just pull the curtain. Own the stage when it falls." Her words rooted in me. I realized revenge wouldn't be enough if it ended with his ruin. My victory would be to rise in his place, quietly, firmly, undeniably. So I found a mentor. Dr. Crane, the professor who had spotted my hunger for patterns, agreed to guide me. She smelled always of peppermint tea and carried a leather briefcase older than me. Under her watch, I learned to read balance sheets like novels, contracts like confessionals. Business isn't about ideas, she told me one night as snow piled against the classroom windows. It's about survival. Those who endure longest win. Her words struck deep. Survival had always been my language. By spring, Alden's empire showed more public cracks. Whispers leaked of unpaid vendors. An investor lawsuit loomed like thunder on the horizon. My parents, of course, remained blind, parading him at every church gathering, introducing him as our genius son. I went silent. That silence was my shield. While they flaunted him, I networked with people quietly, attending small-town investment groups and local business meetups. My face was unfamiliar, my name unnoticed, and I liked it that way. I listened more than I spoke, storing away connections like coins in a hidden vault. One night, scrolling through business auctions, I stumbled on a headline that made my heart still. Ardent Technologies facing bankruptcy auction in 60 days. The words glowed from the laptop screen like a flare in the night sky. My pulse quickened. This was it. The seed I had planted in silence was about to bloom. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the farmhouse ceiling beams. They smelled faintly of smoke, soaked in decades of winters and summers. I realized then that my revenge wouldn't be a strike of lightning. It would be a slow eclipse, swallowing his sun until there was nothing left but my shadow. I closed my laptop gently, almost reverently, like a priest shutting scripture. The hunt had ended. The takeover was about to begin. The day I learned Ardent Technologies would be auctioned, the air outside smelled of thawing earth and wet leaves. Spring had arrived in Illinois, but for me, it wasn't flowers or birdsong that stirred excitement. It was the quiet knowledge that the storm I'd been waiting for had finally broken. I had 60 days. 60 days to turn myself from a woman with blisters on her palms into someone capable of buying my brother's crumbling empire. It sounded impossible. But impossibility had always been my family's definition of me. And for once, I was grateful for it. I began with numbers. I needed capital more than I had ever touched in my life. My savings were laughable, scraps from ranch work, tutoring, and late-night shifts at a diner. But I had something stronger than money. I had knowledge of his debts, the rot in his foundation. And knowledge, I had learned, can be collateral in the right hands. Dr. Crane introduced me to a retired banker named Lowell Caraway. He was a wiry man with parchment skin, smelling faintly of tobacco and ink, who met me in a diner booth sticky with syrup. He listened as I laid out spreadsheets, reports, whispers of lawsuits, investor discontent. He didn't interrupt, only stirred his black coffee with a trembling hand. When I finished, he leaned back, eyes narrowed. "You've done your homework. You're not looking to invest, are you? You're looking to take." "Yes," I said quietly. His laugh was dry, like leaves snapping underfoot. "I like you, Miss Holloway. Most come begging for handouts. You come with a knife." He became my first ally. Through his contacts, I met 2 more investors, women in their 50s who had lost fortunes to arrogant sons and husbands. They smelled of Chanel and cigarette smoke, and when I spoke, I saw in their eyes not pity but recognition. I wasn't just buying a company, I was avenging something we all understood: betrayal. Piece by piece, I built a coalition. Silent investors. Allies who wanted Alden to fall as much as I did. They provided funds, and I promised them something stronger than return on investment. I promised them vindication. Meanwhile, my parents paraded Alden around town as though nothing was wrong. At church, they spoke proudly of his genius. At community events, they introduced him as the visionary entrepreneur. When I passed them in the grocery store one Saturday, the smell of overripe fruit heavy in the air, my mother turned her face away as though I were a stain on her sleeve. They didn't know. They couldn't even imagine. At night, I studied auction law, rehearsing every possibility, every loophole. I wrote notes until my fingers cramped, whispering strategy into the farmhouse dark. Sometimes I imagined Alden's face when the gavel fell, when his company was no longer his. The thought tasted sweet, like honey laced with iron. But beneath the anticipation, there was also fear. What if I failed? What if my investors lost faith? What if, in the end, my parents were right that I was nothing but a jealous shadow trailing behind Alden's light? On nights like that, Dahlia would sit with me on the porch, the smell of her piped smoke curling into the air. "Fear's a good thing," she'd say. "It means you know the stakes. But don't let it choke you, Maren. You're not that little girl sketching cities anymore. You're the one building them now." Her words steadied me. When the notice arrived, official date set for the auction, I felt no panic. Only stillness. Like standing in the eye of a storm. I wasn't walking into that room as the forgotten daughter anymore. I was walking in as a hunter ready to claim her kill. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood, a mixture that clung to my throat like dust. It was the kind of place where fortunes changed hands with no more ceremony than the slam of a gavel. I wore a navy suit I'd bought secondhand from a thrift store, the hem a little too long, the shoulders a little too wide. But it didn't matter. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to win. The room buzzed with low conversations, men in pressed suits whispering to one another, their colognes sharp and suffocating. Women in pearls clicked open pens, scribbling on folders. The auctioneer, a broad man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, cleared his throat and adjusted his papers. At the back of the room sat Alden, my brother, my rival, my executioner once upon a time. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his tie blood red, his smile rehearsed. Our parents flanked him like loyal guards, my mother's perfume so strong I could smell it even from across the aisle. She leaned in and whispered something to him, and he laughed, sharp and brittle. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and dismissed me the way they always had. Either way, it didn't matter. The auction began. The numbers started high, climbing like fever. Investors barked bids, their voices bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. Arden Technologies was more debt than flesh, but still, vultures circled, hoping to strip what little meat remained. I waited. Every heartbeat was a drum in my chest, every rise in the bidding like a tide threatening to drown me. My investors sat scattered around the room, silent, their eyes on me. I gave no signal yet. Timing was everything. At one point, Alden leaned forward, speaking to a man beside him, trying to negotiate privately. His confidence sickened me. He still thought he controlled the stage. Then the numbers began to fall. The frenzy slowed. Interest cooled. The carcass of his empire lay bare, and only those who smelled opportunity remained. That was my moment. I raised my hand. My voice, steady as a stone, cut through the murmurs. 1.3 million. Heads turned. Pens paused. The auctioneer looked over his glasses at me, surprised by the firmness in my tone. Across the room, Alden finally noticed me. His smile faltered. For a brief second, his mask slipped, and I saw something raw flicker in his eyes: fear. He tried to outbid me. 1.5, he snapped. His voice cracked slightly, but he covered it with bravado. I didn't flinch. 1.8. A hush fell. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. My investors nodded almost imperceptibly, backing me with their silent weight. Alden scrambled, whispering urgently to our father, who shook his head. My mother clutched her pearls as though the strand might snap. The auctioneer's voice boomed. 1.8 million. Going once, going twice. Time slowed. My palms were damp against the worn fabric of my suit. The wood-paneled walls blurred. All I could hear was the echo of laughter from that dining table a year ago, my parents calling me jealous, a failure, nothing. Sold. The gavel struck like thunder. For a moment, the room tilted, and I thought I might collapse under the enormity of it. But I stood still, spine straight, face unreadable. I had done it. Arden Technologies, Alden's dream, my stolen inheritance, our parents' pride, was mine. I looked across the room at my brother. His face had drained of color, his mouth half open. My parents stared at me as if I had stepped out of a coffin. I didn't smile. Not yet. Revenge wasn't in the winning. It was in what came after. The courthouse steps were cold beneath my heels as I walked out with the deed in my hands. The papers smelled faintly of ink and dust, as though carrying the weight of a century of other ruined empires. Outside, the sky was pale gray, neither storm nor sun, the kind of sky that waits for history to happen. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Alden, my parents, the investors who had once adored him, they were still inside, nursing the shock of a gavel that had rewritten our family story in a single strike. That night, Dahlia and I sat at her farmhouse table, the deed spread between us. Her kitchen smelled of rosemary bread cooling on the counter, though neither of us touched it. She studied the papers, then looked up at me with eyes that seemed older than time. "You've taken the bones, Maren," she said softly. "Now what will you build with them?" Her question haunted me. Winning the company wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a new burden. Arden Technologies was bankrupt, hollow, riddled with debts. To the world, it looked like I had just bought a corpse. But I knew corpses could be revived if you knew which veins to stitch. Over the next weeks, I stepped into the building that had once been Alden's kingdom. The air was heavy with stale coffee and disappointment. Desks sat abandoned, computer screens blank. The walls smelled faintly of mildew, as though the company itself had been rotting from the inside. I met with the remaining employees, young, tired, their faith drained by Alden's empty promises. They looked at me skeptically at first, expecting another dreamer in a suit. But I didn't come with speeches. I came with plans. I rolled up my sleeves, sat with them in break rooms, asked questions no one had asked them before. What do you need to do your job? What did Alden promise and fail to deliver? What keeps this place alive for you? Their answers weren't about profits or flashy innovation. They were about dignity, stability, the simple desire to be respected. I began to restructure. Slowly, carefully. I cut unnecessary contracts, renegotiated with vendors, and poured my time into designing one streamlined product, something real, something useful. The process was grueling, like scraping rust off a blade, but underneath the rot, there was steel. Meanwhile, Alden circled like a wounded animal. He called me, his voice shaking with anger. "You don't know what you're doing, Maren. You'll destroy it. Give it back before you humiliate yourself." I listened in silence, then ended the call without a word. His voice reminded me of that dining table, his laughter echoing like knives. But now, the knives were dull. Our parents were no better. My father left a voicemail laced with fury, accusing me of betrayal, of selfishness. My mother sent a message dripping with contempt, calling me a thief of family legacy. Neither realized the irony, that the legacy they had stolen from me was the very weapon I had used to take back what was mine. Late at night, when exhaustion pressed against me like a lead blanket, I'd walk through the empty offices. The floor smelled faintly of wax from the janitor's mop, and the hum of the air vents became my only companion. In those moments, I realized something chilling. My revenge was no longer about Alden or my parents. It was about me. About proving to myself that I could build something from ashes. Still, I knew one thing remained unfinished. I hadn't yet faced Alden, not truly. I hadn't looked him in the eye as I stood in the place he believed he owned. That day was coming. And when it did, the silence I had carried all those years would finally break. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, spilling me onto the top floor, the floor that used to belong to Alden. His office. His throne. The hallway was lined with glass walls, reflecting fragments of myself as I walked past. My heels struck the polished floor with a rhythm that felt like a countdown. In my hand, I carried the new letterhead, Arden Technologies, my name etched where his had once stood. When I pushed open the heavy glass door, the room smelled faintly of stale cologne and bourbon. The blinds were half drawn, spilling stripes of sunlight across the desk where Alden sat. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his once perfect posture collapsed into something smaller, weaker. Maren. He said my name like it burned. Alden. I said his name like it meant nothing. He rose, his jaw tight, his eyes darting to the folder in my hand. You think you've won. But you don't understand what you've taken on. This company isn't yours. It's never been yours. I walked slowly toward the desk, the silence between us stretching, sharp as glass. I placed the folder down, sliding it across to him. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The bold black letters on the front told him everything. Arden Technologies, I said. It's mine now. The courts agreed. The papers are filed. You don't own this company anymore. You don't even own the name. For the first time in years, I saw it, the flicker of fear behind his eyes. He masked it quickly with anger, slamming his fist onto the desk. You think this makes you strong? You think taking what I built makes you anything more than a thief? I leaned closer, my voice low but steady. No, Alden. I'm not the thief. I'm the reckoning. Every lie you told, every betrayal you dressed up as brilliance, this is the price. And the best part? You didn't lose to the markets. You didn't lose to investors. You lost to me. The words hung in the air like smoke. His face twisted, caught between rage and disbelief. He searched for something to say, some weapon to throw at me, but there was nothing left. The empire he thought untouchable now wore my name, and he couldn't erase it. Finally, he sank back into his chair, the fight leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. You'll regret this, he muttered, but his voice was hollow, his threat empty. I straightened, turning toward the door. My reflection in the glass looked taller than I remembered, steadier. At the threshold, I paused and looked back once. No, Alden, I said softly. The only thing I regret is waiting this long. And then I left him there, in the office that wasn't his anymore, surrounded by shadows of power he no longer owned. When word spread that Maren Holloway was no longer in control, the city seemed to exhale. Investors who once clung to his every word now avoided his calls. Partners who toasted him in mahogany boardrooms began rewriting history, pretending they had always seen through him. Reputation is a fragile currency and has burned faster than dry leaves. I didn't have to engineer his downfall. He carried the weight of it himself. Every bridge he burned, every corner he cut, every lie he dressed as vision, all of it had been waiting like a noose. All I did was pull the final thread. I watched from the distance of glass towers and courtroom halls as Alden began to unravel. He started showing up at meetings that no longer belonged to him, his face red with the desperation of a man clawing at the edges of relevance. He barked at assistants who no longer answered to him, slammed doors that no longer opened at his command. One afternoon, I found myself across the street from his old condo, the one our parents had helped him buy years ago. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the glow of a television flickering against the glass. The once pristine balcony, where he used to host parties with champagne and glittering guests, now held nothing but an overturned chair and a cigarette tray overflowing. Rumors swirled, unpaid debts, projects collapsing without his hand to prop them up, friends quietly cutting him off. He had become what he once mocked a liability. The irony was sharp. He used to call me invisible, a shadow no one would remember. Now he was the one fading, his name slipping from headlines, replaced by mine. The company newsletters carried my signature. The legal documents bore my title. His empire had not been stolen, it had been inherited by the only one strong enough to carry it. But the most bitter twist wasn't what he lost, it was who abandoned him. Our parents, who once poured everything into him, no longer answered his calls. I heard from an old neighbor that they sold the lake house he loved, cashing in on a property deed that was never truly his. They had shifted their loyalty the way they always had, to whoever promised the greater return. For the first time, Alden was the one left out in the cold. And I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. His downfall was not a victory parade. It was a slow drowning, and watching it stirred something complicated in me. Pity. But pity is not the same as forgiveness. I remembered the dining room table, the lemon oil stinging my nose, the sound of their laughter as they gave away my future. That memory stayed sharp as a blade, even as Alden stumbled into obscurity. His fall did not erase my pain. It simply balanced the scales. The last time I saw him, he was sitting outside a diner off the highway, his suit crumpled, his hair undone, a man carved down to scraps. He looked up at me as I passed, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw recognition. Not of me as his sister, but of me as the force that ended him. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. Some endings require silence to be complete. The day I signed the final papers making the company wholly mine, I drove back to the suburb where it had all begun. The streets were narrower than I remembered, the houses smaller, the lawns less manicured. Time had pulled the shine away, leaving only what was real. I parked in front of my parents' old house. The shutters sagged, the garden weeds reached like uninvited hands, and the porch light hung crooked. They had sold the lake house to pay debts, and eventually this place too. My mother's perfume no longer lingered in the halls. My father's voice no longer thundered across the yard. What was left was silence, a hollow reminder of the empire they thought they could build through Alden. I walked to the porch and sat on the steps. The air smelled of cut grass, just as it had when I was younger, but now it carried something else, freedom. My past was here, but it no longer owned me. For years, I carried their betrayal like a stone in my chest. I thought revenge would melt it, that taking everything back would somehow return what I lost. But standing there, I realized the truth. Revenge hadn't healed me. It had only given me space to finally see myself without their shadows. Alden was gone, swallowed by his own pride. My parents had scattered into the obscurity they feared most. And me? I was still here. Stronger. Unbroken. I thought of the college fund they stole, the $100,000 that was supposed to be my beginning. Losing it had forced me to create my own path, one no one could touch. That fund was gone, but in its absence, I had built something far greater myself. As the evening settled, I traced the cracks in the pavement with my eyes. Life was never going to hand me the storybook justice I once imagined. There would be no apologies, no sudden warmth from the people who had cast me aside. But that was okay, because winning wasn't about firing Alden. It wasn't about signatures on paper. It wasn't even about owning the company he thought defined him. Winning was about walking away from the wreckage without bitterness in my throat, carrying only the lessons that shaped me. I stood, brushed the dust from my jeans, and stepped off the porch for the last time. The house, the street, the town, all of it became smaller in my rearview mirror until it disappeared. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't chasing either. I was simply moving forward. And that was the quietest, most powerful victory of all.